Biblical parenting champions godly character, depositing truth into the hearts and their minds of our kids that's going to shape their lives. And it takes time. And it's fascinating because there was a time when Israel, when they were guilty of idolatry and rebellion against the Most High God, and the Lord judged them, and the Lord brought them into captivity through the likes of the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And if you look over into Daniel chapter 1, it speaks of how Daniel and his 3 friends, they were just young teenagers, young people, and they deliberately stood for the truth of God and His Word in a pagan culture. In fact, they were actually, they perhaps even were physically castrated as eunuchs and given Babylonian pagan names. But in the midst of all that, they were resolute in that, hey, they were not going to defile themselves with Nebuchadnezzar's unclean food. And so, in other words, they understood who they were, and they understood whose they were. In other words, they were the recipient, through the hands of their parents and their grandparents, of a megadose of what's described as Hebrew family discipleship. And so what's fascinating in that context, I bring this up, because never in Holy Scripture do you see faithful Hebrew parents and grandparents willingly sending their children to the Babylonians or the Philistines or the Egyptians for their education and discipleship. And so the challenge for us today is that to learn a lesson from the pages of Holy Scripture and the pages of history, applying to our lives in a counterculturally radical, intentional way of passing on the truth to the next generation. Because God's heart is, just as we read in the Bible drill, Psalm 78, that biblical parenting champions generational faithfulness.